I wanted to speak today about honesty in fiction and essentially how I became a writer ultimately, and just what it means to put our heart on the page. And to give you my perspective on that, I have to bore you a little bit with my author origin story, so please bear with me for a little bit. Ever since I was a kid, like 9 or 10 or 11 years old, writing was something that my friends knew I did, but they never actually got to read any of it themselves. They rarely even knew what I was writing half the time, just that I was always kind of typing away on my laptop. And the one exception is a Pokemon comic book that I made for my straight best friend when I was 12. I had the biggest crush on him, and it was my first big gay crush. But my being gay didn't exactly turn him gay, so that was probably a summer better spent doing literally anything else except drawing him a comic. But that was the only piece of fiction that my friends knew that I put out into the world. So whenever my friends would even come over to play video games, I would make sure that the computer monitor was shifted away from their vision so no one could literally see what I was doing. Like, you would think that I was up to something really nefarious. And I was just very private about my writing. I think even sometimes ashamed, because I grew up in the South Bronx in New York, where art wasn't necessarily celebrated, at least in my experience. And everyone was up to everything else. Like, to be a guy, you had to be participating in sports and all these other things, and that was not of any interest to me. Much to my father's disappointment, and much to anyone's disappointment who sees this height and doesn't see me playing basketball. They're really annoyed at me. But writing has always been my thing. It's always been an outlet, and I actually got into it because of fan fiction. And for those of you who don't know what fan fiction is, I will break it down for you right now. Essentially, it's when there is an existing source of material, so whether it's a published book or a movie or a film or a video game or a comic book, whatever it is, something that you've read or experienced or watched, and then you play in that world. And that was something that was so great for me, because I always wanted more from whatever I was reading and whatever I was watching, and this was my opportunity to sort of play in someone else's playground and their sandbox. Stories all begin with a what if point, and all that to say, oh, what if Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory dated? What if Harry was Voldemort's son? All these questions that we ask ourselves that we can explore through fiction. And it was a what if question that led me to write my debut novel, More Happy Than Not, which asked the question, if you were gay and you could change that, would you do so for your own happiness and well-being? My original approach to the novel was very, very off. This was in 2011, when dystopian novels like The Hunger Games and Divergent were really dominating the bestseller list, and everyone was eager to crank out a dystopian novel now to get in on that while it was hot. And I was a very ambitious 21-year-old, so I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna cash in on this dystopian trend. So More Happy Than Not was originally going to be a dystopian trilogy about a gay teenager who's kidnapped by his scientist father and turned straight against his will. And then the boy is sent out into the streets to hunt down other queer people to turn them straight. Really unreadable, right? I'm embarrassed pitching that right now, and I was embarrassed writing it. Literally 10 pages into the book, 10 pages. I remember hitting double digits and feeling proud about that, and then I remember feeling really disheartened by the whole process and story. I killed off the main character. I just had the scientist's father shoot him dead. I'm like, oh well, book's done. Can't do much beyond this. And so I took a step back, because I was like, okay, this is clearly not a book that speaks to my heart. It's not something that I actually want to put out into the world. Not to cash in on an expiring trend, but I knew I wanted to make my story more grounded. I wasn't going to tell a trilogy. Everything I wanted to tell about this boy, Aaron Soto, I would do it in a single volume. And this also was sort of inspired by this really great dystopian novel I'd read called The Postmortal by Drew Magore years ago, where I was like, oh, wow, here's this wonderful novel that feels so complete in just one book. It isn't dragged out longer than it needs to be, because #publishing. And I felt very inspired by that, and everything that I knew that I wanted to do about Aaron's story, the conflict wouldn't come from someone else trying to change his sexuality, but something that he would force on himself. It would be his choice, devastating and heartbreaking, and that's how I came to write that book. And in doing so, I learned that I was really, really, truly writing about myself and what my life could have looked like at 16 if I'd made the decision, if I were presented with the opportunity to be straight and pursued it. It was the scariest and like most honest vision of what I thought could have happened, and I know that sometimes leads to it being a hard read, but it was very therapeutic for me. You know, like I'm 27 now, and I'm like so happy being gay. Like it really does bring me like such great joy. I have a hot boyfriend. That's great. We have a puppy. He's daddy one. I'm daddy two. Like I mean, my life is very domestic and awesome right now. And it's not something that I ever would have expected for myself, like at 16. Like I didn't think that I would ever be standing up here on a podium and anywhere in any kind of state, feeling comfortable speaking about my sexuality openly. You know, like that. It still blows my mind, and I've been doing this for a couple of years now. But and you know, while writing More Happy Than Not, I realized that like from everything that I write from here on out, I wanted it to unlock a fear of mine so that I not only face my truth, but that I can overcome those fears and just be my best Adam. The week my debut novel, More Happy Than Not, published, actually the very day, I discovered a really huge difference between publishing a novel under my real name versus publishing a fun adventure stories under pseudonyms for fanfiction.net. Readers were emailing me directly to share stories about their own struggles of being scared to come out. Some even came out to me over email, like for the first time. And on the very day that my book published, one girl told me about her struggles with suicide and said, "I read this book and I know that you get it." And that just shocked me so much. And I mean, just to give you some context on why, it's just, I never thought that I would write something that would matter to someone. Like I think I was coming from my fan fiction entertainment mentality where I was providing recess for someone or whatever. I didn't think that, nothing that I wrote there was hitting home for people. Like you were reading about spells and stuff, and I didn't quite touch upon the humanity in the way that like J.K. Rowling and so many of these other wonderful creators have done. And I think I was just writing endless fight scenes, pretty much. And but I got more and more emails like that. People kind of exposing themselves to me because of something that they recognized in the book. And it was through those interactions, as heavy as many of them were, that I learned to recognize that way more of myself was on the page than I had really even expected. Whenever I'm going through something, I always write about it. And I'd already written about, I didn't want to craft a whole novel around it. I just sort of wanted to put myself out there in a way that was a little more, I think way more vulnerable than ever before. And I wrote like a blog post about it, and I just sort of threw it up there, and I wasn't sure what it would do. And it led to way more emails than ever before, were just people who understood and people who needed to hear it. And it's a power of words that I've really come to love and appreciate over the past few years, and to seek out more stories like that. And ultimately, as I move forward in my career, I want to tell my truth, and I want to encourage others to tell theirs as well, because I think people need to hear it. So yeah, thank you so much.